I found the invoice wedged between my storm door and front door on a Tuesday morning in late March, flapping in the cool Arizona breeze like some kind of administrative death sentence. The paper was crisp, official-looking, with the Sunset Ridge Home Owners Association letterhead emblazoned across the top in that pretentious serif font they loved so much. Special Assessment, Landscape Renovation Project, amount due $2,847.00. Payment deadline, April 15th. My coffee went cold in my hand as I stood there on my doorstep in Gilbert, reading and rereading those numbers. $2,800, for what? I had seen the landscaping work they were talking about, the new rock gardens and desert plantings along the main entrance and around the community pool. Sure, it looked nice, but how could that possibly cost enough to require a special assessment of almost $3,000 per household? Our HOA fees were already $310 a month. Where was all that money going? I pulled out my phone and texted my neighbor, Marcus Chen, who lived 3 doors down. He was an accountant, meticulous about everything, and had been on the HOA board years ago before he quit in frustration. His response came back within seconds. Got mine too. This is insane. Come over tonight. We need to talk. By the time I walked up Marcus's driveway that evening, the sun was setting over the desert mountains in streaks of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if I was not so angry. Marcus opened the door before I could knock, his face tight with the same frustration I felt churning in my gut. Come in. Sarah's making coffee. He gestured me inside their immaculate home, everything organized and in its place, just like you would expect from an accountant. His wife Sarah waved from the kitchen, already pouring 3 cups. We settled around their dining room table, and Marcus spread out several documents he had apparently already gathered. I've been doing some digging since I got that invoice this morning, he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. The board approved this landscape renovation project back in January. There was a notice in the monthly newsletter, but it was vague, just said they were improving community aesthetics and would assess costs accordingly. I remember that, Sarah said. It was like 2 sentences buried on page 4 between the pool rules reminder and the trash pickup schedule. Right, so I started looking into the public records. Marcus pulled out another sheet. The HOA is required to file certain documents with the state. Contracts over $10,000 have to be disclosed to homeowners upon request. I made a request this afternoon. And I leaned forward, my coffee forgotten. They told me the information would be available in 7 to 10 business days. He smiled grimly, which means they are stalling. But here is what I already know from the last board meeting minutes that are posted online. The total project cost was $375,000. I choked on the sip of coffee I had just taken. $375,000 for some rocks and cactuses. There are 132 homes in Sunset Ridge, Marcus continued, his accountant brain clearly having already done all the math. At $2,847 per house, that is $375,804. The math checks out on the assessment. What does not check out is how the hell landscaping should cost that much. Sarah pulled up something on her iPad. I looked at comparable projects in other HOAs in Gilbert. Most communities our size that did similar desert landscaping renovations spent between $80,000 and $120,000. Even the really fancy ones with water features and custom lighting did not break $200,000. We sat there in silence for a moment, the implications settling over us like a heavy blanket. So where did the extra $250,000 go? I asked, though I suspected we were all thinking the same thing. That is exactly what we need to find out. Marcus stood up and started pacing, which I had learned over our 3 years, as neighbors meant he was moving into problem-solving mode. We need to see the actual contracts. We need to know who did the work and what they charged for every single line item. The board president is still Karen Whitfield, right? I asked. I had only met her a handful of times, usually when she was leaving nastagrams about my trash, cans being visible from the street or my grass being a quarter-inch too long. She was exactly what you would picture. Mid-50s, blonde highlights that were too blonde, always wearing athleisure where even though I had never seen her exercise, and with that particular tone of voice that could make good morning sound like a threat. Unfortunately, yes, Sarah said with a sigh. She's been president for 4 years now. Deborah Martinez is vice president, and then there is Tom Henderson and Barbara Sullivan as board members. I've never even seen Tom or Barbara at community events, I said. That is because they do not come to them, Marcus replied. They just show up to vote however Karen tells them to vote. I watched it happen when I was on the board. Karen runs everything. The other 3 are just there to make it look legitimate. Over the next week, Marcus and I became amateur investigators. We started talking to other neighbors, and the reaction was the same everywhere. Shock, anger, and confusion about the special assessment. A lot of people had just assumed it was legitimate because, well, it came from the HOA board on official letterhead. Most people do not question that kind of thing. But some folks had information that started to paint an interesting picture. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow who had lived in Sunset Ridge since the development was built 12 years ago, mentioned that she had seen the same white truck at the community entrance almost every day during the renovation. Had some company name on the side, she said. Something like Desert Dream Landscaping or Desert something. And the man driving it looked an awful lot like that young man who comes to visit Karen sometimes. That caught my attention. Karen's son? I think so. Tall, dark hair, always wearing wraparound sunglasses. I have seen him at her house for barbecues and such. I texted this to Marcus immediately. His response, let me make some calls. 2 days later, Marcus showed up at my door at 7 in the morning, startling me as I was about to leave for my job at the software company downtown. He was holding his laptop and practically vibrating with energy. Desert Premier Landscaping, he said without preamble. That is the contractor. I finally got the contract information from the HOA last night after I threatened to bring a lawyer to the next board meeting. Want to guess who owns Desert Premier Landscaping? Karen's son, I said. Bingo, Jason Whitfield. Registered the LLC 3 years ago, and it gets better. He opened his laptop and showed me the Arizona Corporation Commission website. His wife, Melissa Whitfield, runs a company called Premier Pool Services. Want to guess who got the contract for the pool renovation last summer? My stomach dropped. You are kidding. I am not. $68,000 for pool resurfacing and new equipment. I looked up quotes from 3 other pool companies in the area. The average was $22,000. This is fraud, I said flatly. This is straight-up fraud. It is absolutely a conflict of interest at minimum, Marcus agreed. And potentially embezzlement, self-dealing, breach of fiduciary duty, take your pick. The question is, what do we do about it? We decided our first step was to gather more evidence and then present it to the full community. If we could get enough homeowners on our side, we could force a special election to recall the board members, or at least demand a full financial audit. Marcus discovered that, according to our HOA's CC and Artiques, the governing documents, 20% of homeowners could petition for a special meeting. 20% of 132 was only 27 homes. That felt doable. But we had to be careful. If we went off half-cocked with incomplete information, Karen and her board could dismiss us as troublemakers and turn the community against us. We needed everything documented, provable, and clear. I started pulling permits from the town of Gilbert. Any major construction or renovation work requires permits, and those permits are public record. Sure enough, Desert Premier Landscaping had pulled the permit for our HOA's landscape renovation. The permit listed a project value of $125,000, not $375,000. That was interesting. If the actual permitted work was only worth $125,000, but Jason charged $375,000, where was the rest? Marcus, meanwhile, had gotten his hands on invoices from Desert Premier. One of the board members, Tom Henderson, had actually responded to Marcus's email asking for detailed financial records, apparently not realizing or not caring that he was opening Pandora's box. Maybe Tom was just tired of Karen's nonsense too. The invoices were works of fiction. Line items like specialty desert plant installation, $95,000, and custom irrigation system, $78,000, and my personal favorite, landscape consultation and design services, $42,000. I called a landscape architect in Scottsdale, Marcus told me. Top-of-the-line designer. She quoted me $8,000 for full design services for a project this size. $42,000 is what you would pay to landscape a resort. We also discovered that Melissa's pool company had charged our HOA for weekly maintenance services at a rate of $800 per week. That was $41,000 per year just for someone to skim leaves and check chlorine levels. The going rate for pool service in Gilbert was about $150 a week, maybe $200 for a large community pool. They have been bleeding this HOA dry for years, Sarah said when we met again at their house, now with a growing folder of evidence. If Jason and Melissa have been overcharging on every single contract, we are talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. We need to bring this to the other homeowners, I said. Like now. Before they start enforcing that special assessment and people start paying. Marcus nodded. I've been drafting an email to send to everyone in the community. We have a directory. But I think we should also call a meeting, something public where people can ask questions and see everything we have found. The board will try to shut that down, Sarah warned. They can try, Marcus said with a grim smile. But according to our bylaws, any homeowner can reserve the clubhouse for a community gathering as long as it is not already booked. I checked. Next Saturday night is open. I am booking it. That weekend, we went door to door. Well, not every door. We strategically picked about 40 houses, ones where we knew the homeowners, or had at least seen them around and seemed reasonable. We handed out flyers about the meeting, keeping it simple. Concerned about the special assessment, questions about HOA spending, community information meeting this Saturday at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. All homeowners welcome. Karen found out, of course. On Thursday, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. This is Karen Whitfield, HOA Board President. Her voice was clipped, tight with barely controlled anger. I understand you and Marcus Chen are spreading misinformation about the board and organizing some kind of meeting. We are not spreading misinformation, I said, keeping my voice level. We are sharing publicly available information about HOA contracts and spending. And yes, we are holding a community meeting. Any homeowner can reserve the clubhouse. I believe you wrote that policy yourself 3 years ago. That facility is for community events, not for rabble-rousing and conspiracy theories. It is a community event. The community wants information about where their money is going. There was a pause. When Karen spoke again, her voice had shifted to a tone that probably worked on people less stubborn than me. Listen, I understand that special assessment is a lot of money. But you have to understand quality work costs money. We hired the best contractors. Everything was above board and approved by the full board. Then you will have no problem with us discussing it at the meeting, I said. In fact, you should come. Bring the contracts. Bring the invoices. Show everyone that everything is legitimate. Another pause. I do not have to justify board decisions to you or anyone else. The board has the authority to make financial decisions on behalf of the community. It is in the bylaws. The board has a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the community, I countered. I had been reading those bylaws very carefully. Not to enrich themselves or their family members, that is also in the bylaws. I do not know what you think you are implying, but I would be very careful about making accusations you cannot prove. That is called slander, and it is illegal. Good thing I am not planning to say anything I cannot prove then. She hung up on me. Saturday evening arrived with that electric feeling of something about to break wide open. Marcus and I showed up to the clubhouse at 6 to set up. We had printed out copies of all the documents we had found. Contracts, invoices, permit records, comparative quotes from other companies, everything. We also had a PowerPoint presentation because Marcus was nothing if not thorough. By 6:45, people started arriving. By 7, the clubhouse was packed. I counted at least 70 people, maybe 80, which was more than half the households in Sunset Ridge. People were angry. You could feel it in the air, that collective frustration that comes from feeling ripped off. Karen showed up at 7:15 with Deborah Martinez and Barbara Sullivan in tow. Tom Henderson was noticeably absent. They tried to walk in like they owned the place, which technically they kind of did as the board, but the crowd was not having it. People actually moved out of their way, but not in a respectful way. More like making a path for someone heading to the gallows. Marcus started the meeting by thanking everyone for coming and laying out the basics. The special assessment, the amount, the project it was supposedly funding. Then he put up the first slide showing the total cost compared to similar projects in other Gilbert HOAs. The murmuring started immediately. As you can see, Marcus continued, the cost of our landscape renovation is approximately 3 times higher than comparable projects. Naturally, this raised questions about why. He clicked to the next slide. So we did some investigating. The contractor for our landscape renovation was Desert Premier Landscaping, owned by Jason Whitfield. He paused. Jason is the son of our HOA president, Karen Whitfield. The murmuring turned into actual talking, people turning to each other, voices rising. Karen stood up. This is a witch hunt. My son runs a legitimate business, and his company was hired because they submitted a competitive bid. Did they? Marcus clicked to the next slide showing quotes from 3 other landscaping companies for similar work, all coming in between $80,000 and $130,000. Because we got quotes. And they are not competitive at all. Those are not comparable, Karen insisted. Our project had specific requirements. Like what? Someone called out from the crowd. It was Mr. Reeves from Seguero Court, a retired contractor himself. Specialty plants, custom irrigation, design services, Karen rattled off. Marcus was ready. He pulled up photos of the actual landscaping. These are standard drought-resistant plants available at any nursery in Arizona. The irrigation system is basic drip lines, standard installation. And the design is a pretty conventional desert landscape arrangement. He clicked again. But Desert Premier charged $42,000 for design services alone. This is ridiculous, Deborah Martinez spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. The board approved this, we all voted on it. Did you review the actual costs? I asked, standing up. Did you get comparative bids from other companies? Did anyone on the board think it was strange that the president's son was getting a contract for 3 times the normal rate? Silence from the board members. Sarah stood up from where she had been sitting in the middle of the crowd. It is not just the landscaping. We also looked into the pool renovation from last summer. Premier Pool Services, owned by Melissa Whitfield, Jason's wife. $68,000 for work that typically costs $20,000 to $25,000. And the ongoing pool maintenance, Marcus added. $800 per week when the market rate is $150 to $200. The crowd was getting louder now, people shouting questions. How long has this been going on? Where else has the money gone? Why did not anyone catch this? Karen's face had gone red. You have no right to harass my family or their businesses. They provide quality services. At triple the price, someone yelled. I want to see the books, another voice called out. It was Mrs. Chen from Desert Willow Lane, a lawyer. I want a full financial audit of the HOA going back at least 5 years. A chorus of agreement rose up. The board will consider that request, Karen said tightly. No, Mrs. Chen stood up. We are not requesting. According to Arizona Revised Statute 33 to 1810, homeowners have the right to examine HOA financial records. And according to our bylaws, 20% of homeowners can call for a special election to recall board members. I think we have way more than 20% in this room right now. The crowd erupted in applause and agreement. Marcus pulled out papers he had prepared. We have a petition here to recall the current board and install an interim board to conduct a full financial audit and review all contracts from the past 5 years. Anyone who wants to sign can do so tonight. People practically stampeded to sign. Karen tried to say something else, but no one was listening to her anymore. She, Deborah, and Barbara left the clubhouse within 10 minutes, Karen's face set in a furious mask. By the end of the night, we had signatures from 93 households, more than enough. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Marcus, Mrs. Chen, Sarah, and I formed a sort of informal leadership committee to organize everything. We officially submitted the recall petition to the board per the bylaws, which required them to schedule a special election within 30 days. We also formally requested access to all financial records, which they had to provide within 10 business days. Karen tried to fight it. She sent out an email to all homeowners claiming that we were a small group of troublemakers trying to undermine the board's authority and damage her family's reputation. She claimed every contract had been properly vetted and approved and that the costs were justified by the quality of work. But people were not buying it anymore. Once you see the numbers laid out clearly, once you understand you have been paying thousands in HOA fees only to have that money funneled to the president's family at inflated rates, trust is broken. And it does not come back. The board did eventually provide the financial records, though they dragged their feet right up to the legal deadline. What we found was even worse than we thought. Jason's landscaping company had received contracts totaling over $600,000 in the past 4 years. Melissa's pool company had received $230,000. But there were others too. Karen's brother-in-law ran an HVAC company that had been hired to service the clubhouse heating and cooling at rates about double the going rate. A cousin owned a painting company that charged the HOA $40,000 to paint the clubhouse exterior, a job that should have cost maybe $12,000. It was a family business, all right. The family business of ripping off the HOA. Mrs. Chen, as a lawyer, started making calls. She contacted the Arizona Attorney General's office and the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOAs. She explained what we had found and asked what our legal options were. The answer was that this almost certainly violated multiple Arizona statutes regarding HOAs and fiduciary duty. The board members, particularly Karen, could face civil liability for breach of fiduciary duty and potentially criminal charges for fraud or embezzlement, depending on what an investigation turned up. We also learned that if board members approved contracts that benefited themselves or their family members without full disclosure, and without ensuring competitive pricing. That was textbook self-dealing and illegal under Arizona law. Armed with this information, Mrs. Chen drafted a formal complaint to the Attorney General's office. About 40 homeowners signed on as complainants. The special election was scheduled for the third Saturday in April. In the meantime, we had to nominate new board members. Marcus agreed to run for president, which made sense given how much work he had already put in. Sarah agreed to be vice president. Mrs. Chen would have been perfect for the board, but as a lawyer, she said she could be more useful in an advisory role. We found 3 other homeowners to round out the 5-person board. Mr. Reeves, the retired contractor, Angela Wu, who worked in finance, and David Torres, a teacher who had been vocal at the meeting about transparency. Karen and her board tried to challenge the election, claiming procedural issues with the petition. But Mrs. Chen had made sure everything was done exactly by the book. There was no wiggle room. The day of the election felt like a referendum on basic honesty. We had a simple question on the ballot. Do you vote to recall the current HOA board and elect the nominated slate of replacement board members? Yes or no? The turnout was unprecedented. 119 of the 132 households voted. When we counted the ballots that night in the clubhouse with witnesses from both sides present, the result was clear. 114 votes yes, 5 votes no. Karen, Deborah, Barbara, and Tom were out. Marcus, Sarah, Mr. Reeves, Angela, and David were in. The first act of the new board was to hire a forensic accountant to conduct a complete audit of the HOA's finances going back 7 years. They also voted to freeze all payments to any contractor currently under contract until those contracts could be reviewed. The second act was to officially cancel the special assessment. The money had not been collected yet, and the new board determined that the original project cost did not justify the assessment. Instead, they would fund any necessary work through existing reserves and normal fee income. The forensic accountant's report came back 6 weeks later, and it was damning. Over 7 years, the HOA had overpaid contractors by an estimated $1.2 million. Almost all of that overpayment went to companies owned by Karen's family members. The accountant's report used phrases like fraudulent invoicing, systematic self-dealing, and breach of fiduciary duty. Mrs. Chen took the report straight to the Attorney General's office and the Maricopa County Attorney. She also filed a civil lawsuit on behalf of the HOA against Karen Whitfield, Jason Whitfield, Melissa Whitfield, and the other board members for the full amount of the overpayments plus damages. By early June, the criminal investigation was in full swing. Detectives from the Gilbert Police Department's White-Collar Crimes Unit interviewed dozens of homeowners and subpoenaed records from the various contractor companies. They brought in forensic accountants to trace money flows. What they found was that Jason and Melissa had been kicking back a portion of their inflated payments to Karen. She had deposited over $200,000 into various bank accounts over the years, money that could not be explained by her regular income as a part-time real estate agent. Her brother-in-law and cousin had similar arrangements. It was not just conflict of interest. It was fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. On a hot Tuesday morning in late July, I was working from home when Marcus texted me, "Turn on the news, Channel 12. I flipped on the TV to see a reporter standing outside the Maricopa County Sheriff's office. 4 people have been arrested this morning in connection with an alleged fraud scheme involving a Gilbert Homeowners Association. Karen Whitfield, former HOA board president, along with her son Jason Whitfield, daughter-in-law Melissa Whitfield, and former board member Deborah Martinez, are facing multiple charges including fraud, theft, and money laundering. Prosecutors allege the group orchestrated a years-long scheme to funnel HOA money to family-owned businesses at inflated rates, stealing over $1 million from the community. The screen cut to footage of Karen being led into the sheriff's office in handcuffs, her face hidden behind her hair. Jason and Melissa were shown being arrested at their home. The reporter continued. The investigation began after homeowners in the Sunset Ridge community noticed irregularities in HOA spending and launched their own inquiry. The case highlights the importance of oversight in homeowners associations and the potential for abuse when board members are not held accountable. I sat there on my couch, staring at the screen, feeling a complicated mix of emotions: satisfaction that justice was being done, anger at what they had gotten away with for so long, relief that we had caught it, and exhaustion because the last 4 months had been a non-stop battle. My phone started buzzing with texts from neighbors. Everyone had seen the news. The community chat was exploding with messages. There was a sense of vindication but also shock. Seeing people you know, even people you do not like, arrested and charged with crimes is surreal. The legal process moved forward through the summer and into the fall. Karen, Jason, Melissa, and Deborah all pleaded not guilty initially. But as the prosecution laid out its case with bank records, emails, invoices, and testimony from the forensic accountants, the evidence was overwhelming. In September, Deborah took a plea deal. She agreed to testify against the others in exchange for reduced charges. She admitted that she had known about the family connections and had been paid $5,000 by Karen to vote yes on the contracts without questioning them. She claimed she had not known the full extent of the fraud, that Karen had told her it was just a small favor to help her son's business get started. The prosecution did not fully buy that, but her testimony was valuable enough to warrant the deal. Tom Henderson, the fourth board member, was not charged. The investigation determined he had been genuinely clueless, just a rubber stamp who never paid attention to what he was voting on. Stupid, but not criminal. By October, faced with Deborah's testimony and the mountain of financial evidence, Jason and Melissa also took plea deals. They admitted to submitting fraudulent invoices and agreed to pay full restitution. Jason was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Melissa got 2 years. Both would be on probation for 5 years after release and were permanently banned from doing business with any HOA in Arizona. Karen held out longer. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had simply been helping her family and had not realized she was violating any laws. But the prosecution showed that Karen had actively concealed the family relationships, had not disclosed conflicts of interest, had inflated contractor bids, and had personally profited through kickbacks. This was not ignorance, this was intentional fraud. In December, as a trial date approached, Karen finally accepted a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to fraud, theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay $900,000 in restitution to the HOA. Her real estate license was permanently revoked. The civil lawsuit moved parallel to the criminal cases. The HOA's lawsuit sought to recover all the overpayments plus damages and legal fees. With the criminal convictions, the civil case became much simpler. In a settlement reached in January, Karen, Jason, and Melissa agreed to liquidate assets to pay restitution. The HOA would receive about $750,000 once everything was sold. Houses, cars, business assets, Jason's boat, Karen's rental property in Scottsdale. It would not cover everything, but it was something. Through all of this, the new HOA board was working to repair the damage and restore trust. Marcus and his team were meticulous about transparency. They published detailed financial reports every month. They put out requests for bids on any work that needed to be done, and required at least 3 competitive bids for any contract over $5,000. They instituted a policy that no board member could have any financial interest in any company doing business with the HOA, direct or indirect. They also organized quarterly town halls where any homeowner could ask questions or raise concerns. The goal was to make sure nothing like this could ever happen again. In February, almost a year after that special assessment notice had shown up on my door, the new board held a community celebration at the clubhouse. It was partly a thank you to everyone who had stood up and demanded accountability. It was partly a fresh start. I stood there with a beer in hand, talking with Marcus and Sarah and Mrs. Chen and a dozen other neighbors who had become friends through this whole ordeal. "You know what the crazy thing is?" Marcus said, looking around at the packed clubhouse. "Before this happened, I did not know half these people. We all just lived in our houses, went to work, came home. The HOA was just this annoying thing that sent us bills and complained about our mailboxes. And now we actually have a community," Sarah finished. "Like an actual community that talks to each other and works together. It should not take fraud and embezzlement to bring neighbors together," Mrs. Chen said dryly, "but I will take what we can get." "What are you going to do with all your free time now?" I asked Marcus. "Now that you are not spending 40 hours a week investigating HOA corruption," he laughed. "I have been thinking about that. The board term is 2 years. After that, I think I am done. Let someone else run things. Maybe I will take up golf." "You hate golf," Sarah pointed out. "Okay, maybe not golf, but something relaxing. Something that does not involve forensic accounting." As the evening wore on and people shared food and stories, I found myself thinking about what we had actually accomplished. We had exposed fraud that had been going on for years right under everyone's noses. We had removed corrupt board members and held them accountable. We had recovered most of the stolen money. We had reformed the HOA's governance to prevent it from happening again. But more than that, we had learned something important about power and accountability. HOAs exist in this weird space where they have real power over people's lives and property, but often operate with minimal oversight. Most people do not pay attention until something goes wrong. And by then, sometimes a lot of damage has been done. Karen had counted on that apathy. She had counted on people just paying their fees and not asking questions. She had counted on the assumption that the board knew what it was doing and had everyone's best interests at heart. And for years, that had worked. It only fell apart when people started asking questions and demanding answers. When we refused to just accept that the board knew best. When we did the work to find the truth, and then had the courage to act on it. I thought about all the other HOAs out there, thousands of them in Arizona alone, hundreds of thousands across the country. How many had boards that were honest and competent? How many had boards that were incompetent but well-meaning? And how many had boards like Karen's, actively stealing from the people they were supposed to serve? There was no way to know. But our story had made the news, not just locally but nationally. It had been picked up by consumer advocacy websites and HOA reform groups. We had gotten emails from people in other states saying our story had inspired them to look more closely at their own HOA finances. A few had found similar problems. Maybe that was the real victory. Not just fixing our own situation, but shining a light on the problem and showing other people that they could push back, that they could demand accountability, that they did not have to just accept whatever their HOA board told them. As I drove home that night, past the newly renovated entrance to Sunset Ridge with its desert landscaping that actually was quite nice, I felt something I had not felt in a long time about this place: pride. Not in the physical community, though it was attractive enough, but in the people, in what we had done together. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus as I pulled into my driveway. "Thanks for having my back through all this. Could not have done it without you," I texted back. "Same. Good to know my neighbors are not all crazy." "Just most of them," he replied. I laughed and went inside, looking forward to the next HOA board meeting where the most controversial topic would probably be whether to allow political signs in yards or update the community pool rules. Normal, boring HOA stuff. After the year we had been through, boring sounded absolutely perfect. The Gilbert Police Department had closed the case by March, with all defendants having pleaded guilty and been sentenced. The county attorney's office issued a press release commending the homeowners of Sunset Ridge for their diligence in uncovering the fraud and cooperating with the investigation. They used it as a case study for training prosecutors on HOA fraud cases. The Arizona Attorney General's office also launched a broader initiative to educate HOA homeowners about their rights and warning signs of fraud. They created a website with resources and a hotline for reporting suspected HOA corruption. Our case was featured prominently as an example of what could happen when board members operated without oversight. By the time summer rolled around again, life in Sunset Ridge had settled into a comfortable routine. The new board was functioning smoothly. The recovered restitution money had been placed in reserves and used to fund some actual needed repairs, resurfacing the tennis courts, updating the playground equipment, and fixing the clubhouse roof that had been leaking for 2 years while Karen's board had claimed there was no money for it. The special assessment was a distant memory, canceled before anyone had paid a dime. Our regular HOA fees had actually been reduced slightly because the new board had negotiated reasonable contracts with contractors who were not related to board members and who charged fair market rates. Imagine that. I ran into Mr. Patterson at the mailbox one afternoon in June. He was the husband of Mrs. Patterson who had first noticed Jason's truck at the entrance during the renovation. "You know," he said, "my wife and I have lived here 12 years. Watched this whole community get built from dirt. We have seen a lot of people come and go, seen a lot of drama over pool rules and parking and whose dog pooped where. But what happened this past year, what you and Marcus and the others did, that is the most important thing that has happened in this community." "We just asked questions," I said. "That is all it takes sometimes," he replied. "Someone willing to ask questions and not accept a bad answer. A lot of people would have just paid that assessment and grumbled about it. You did not." Made all the difference. He was right, in a way. It had started with something as simple as looking at an invoice and thinking, this does not make sense. And then having the stubbornness to keep pulling that thread until the whole sweater unraveled. In August, I got an email from a reporter at the Arizona Republic who was doing a follow-up story on our case. She wanted to interview some of the homeowners involved. I agreed, as did Marcus and Mrs. Chen. The article ran on a Sunday in September, front page of the local section. Sunset Ridge HOA fraud 1 year later. It recapped the whole story, the discovery, the investigation, the arrests, the convictions. It talked about the reforms that had been implemented and the money that had been recovered. And it quoted Marcus saying something that I thought summed it up perfectly. This was not about being anti-HOA or thinking all boards are corrupt. Most board members are volunteers trying their best. But any organization that controls millions of dollars and affects hundreds of families needs checks and balances, needs transparency, needs people paying attention. That is what we learned. That is what we hope other communities learn from our experience. The article also noted that HOA reform legislation was being considered in the Arizona state legislature, partly inspired by high-profile cases like ours. The proposed laws would require more stringent financial reporting, mandatory third-party audits for HOAs over a certain size, and stricter penalties for board members who engaged in self-dealing. Whether those laws would pass was anyone's guess, politics being what it is. But at least the conversation was happening. As fall arrived and the brutal Arizona summer heat finally broke, I found myself actually enjoying living in Sunset Ridge in a way I had not before. I knew my neighbors now. We looked out for each other. We had been through something together and come out stronger. The annual HOA meeting in November was packed, just like every meeting had been since we had exposed the fraud. People paid attention now. They asked questions. They wanted to see the numbers. The board welcomed it, because they had nothing to hide. When Marcus presented the annual financial report, showing that the HOA had ended the year with a healthy reserve fund, all bills paid, all contracts at fair market rates, and even a small surplus that would be used to offset next year's fees, the room burst into applause. "This is what it looks like when your board works for you instead of working for themselves," Marcus said. "This is your money being spent on your community. Everything transparent, everything documented, everything done properly." After the meeting, as people were leaving, I saw Karen's former neighbor, Linda, who still lived 2 doors down from Karen's now vacant house. The house was in foreclosure, part of the restitution process. "Is it weird living next to an empty house?" I asked her. "A little," she admitted. "But honestly, it is better than when Karen was there. She used to spy on everyone, measuring grass height and timing how long garbage cans stayed on the curb." "At least the empty house minds its own business." We both laughed at that. "You think anyone will buy it?" she asked. "With the history and everything?" "Eventually," I said. "It is a nice house in a good neighborhood. Once the bank gets it cleaned up and on the market, someone will want it, and whoever moves in will have no connection to what happened. Fresh start." "I hope they are normal," Linda said. "I have had enough drama to last a lifetime." That sentiment seemed to be shared by everyone in Sunset Ridge. We had all had enough drama. Now we just wanted to live our lives, maintain our homes, enjoy the Arizona sunshine, and know that our HOA was being run honestly and competently. It was not too much to ask. It was actually the bare minimum. But as we had learned, even the bare minimum is not guaranteed. You have to pay attention, you have to ask questions, you have to hold people accountable. Democracy, whether in government or in a homeowners association, requires participation. It requires vigilance. The moment people check out and assume someone else is handling things, that is when the Karen Whitfields of the world see an opportunity. As I walked home from that November meeting, the desert air cool and pleasant, I thought about that invoice that had started everything. $2,800 for a special assessment that made no sense. What if I had just paid it? What if Marcus had just paid it? What if we had all just grumbled and paid it and moved on with our lives? Karen would still be board president. Jason and Melissa would still be getting fat contracts at triple the market rate. The corruption would have continued, probably escalating, until eventually the HOA went bankrupt or the fraud became so obvious even the most checked-out homeowner could not ignore it. But that is not what happened. We asked questions, we investigated, we demanded answers, we took action. And because of that, 4 people were in prison, $750,000 had been recovered, and 132 families in Sunset Ridge had their HOA back. It was not the kind of story you expect when you buy a house in a planned community in Gilbert, Arizona. You expect pool parties and block parties, and maybe some annoying rules about paint colors. You do not expect fraud and embezzlement and criminal investigations, but life is funny that way. Sometimes the most mundane things, like an HOA board meeting, turn into something significant. Sometimes standing up for what is right in a small way in your own community becomes something larger. I had learned a lot over the past year and a half. I had learned how HOAs work, how forensic accounting works, how the criminal justice system handles white-collar crime. I had learned about Arizona statutes and bylaws and fiduciary duty. But more importantly, I had learned about people. I had learned that most people want to do the right thing if given the chance. I had learned that corruption thrives in darkness and dies in sunlight. I had learned that ordinary people, when they work together, can take on and defeat something that seems overwhelming. I had learned that I lived in a community full of good people who just needed a reason to come together. And while I wished that reason had not been financial fraud, I was grateful for the community we had built in response to it. As I reached my house and looked back down the street at the neat rows of homes, the desert landscaping that really did look quite nice in the evening light, and the neighbors walking dogs and kids riding bikes, I felt a sense of peace. Sunset Ridge was a good place to live, not because of the amenities or the location or the property values, though those things were fine. It was a good place to live because of the people. Because when something went wrong, we fixed it together. Because we cared enough to pay attention and act. That was worth more than any perfectly manicured lawn or fancy community pool. That was the kind of wealth that could not be embezzled by a corrupt HOA board. That was the kind of investment that paid dividends every single day. I went inside, made dinner, and settled in for a quiet evening. My phone stayed silent except for a few texts from neighbors about ordinary things like a missing package and someone asking if I had a ladder they could borrow. Normal neighbor stuff. Boring, wonderful, normal neighbor stuff. And that was exactly how I wanted it.